If ever a reminder was needed of the necessity of a peace deal, then this war will willingly oblige. Russian officials say 3 people were killed in Ukrainian airstrikes overnight in the Rostov region, and a Russian missile and drone attack in Ukraine's capital killed at least 6, according to officials, and destroyed homes. Survivors in Kyiv describe scenes of panic as neighbours try to save those trapped, including children.
I'm still in shock, what can I tell you, because I can't believe that this is all real. We understand that we live in a war, that this happens every day, but when you see it like this, you experience it, it's just horror.
I was lying in bed, there was a powerful explosion and glass rained down on me. The window shattered completely, showering me with glass. The entire apartment, everything that was there, was shattered.
As the war nears its grim 4-year milestone, an agreement for the fighting to end still eludes those so desperate for it.
I think that this time nothing will be achieved either. I very much want it all to end. Everyone is tired of it. It's a great grief for us and for Ukraine, so I want it all to end.
But that might be about to change, with US media reporting that Ukraine has agreed to an amended US brokered peace deal after rejecting their initial 28-point proposal that critics suggested was written by President Putin himself. The Prime Minister responded to the news in the Commons.
I welcome the continued efforts of the United States to end the war and stop the killing. The initial draft of the 28-point plan included points that were not acceptable, but also some very important elements that will be essential for a just and lasting peace. And elements relating to Europe and NATO will need the consent of Europe and NATO members. So there's still a long way to go and a tough road ahead.
President Trump's initial peace plan, rejected by the Ukrainians and their European allies, included proposed concessions on reducing the size of Ukraine's army, ceding land captured by Russia, and a ban on NATO membership for Ukraine. A counter-proposal was thrashed out between the US and Ukraine in Geneva this weekend, but Russia is yet to respond.
We have channels of communication with our US counterparts and we use them. We expect to receive the version they consider interim after the coordination phase with Europeans and the Ukrainians ends. Then we will review it, because if the spirit and letter of Anchorage, the key understandings we recorded, are stripped out, it will be a fundamentally different situation. But for now, I repeat, we have not received anything officially.
All eyes on Abu Dhabi, where Trump's unlikely negotiator, US Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, is holding talks with the Russians. Also today, the so-called Coalition of the Willing meets virtually, a group of countries including the UK that aims to support Ukraine and increase pressure on Russia, desperately trying to keep up with the changing terms of agreements that they've largely been shut out from. With President Trump's arbitrary deadline of Thursday to achieve an agreement looming, the ball looks to be back in Russia's court. They agreed to the initial plan. The amended plan has been agreed to by Ukraine. What this will boil down to is whether any agreement can be found between them both.
Joining me now is Alexander Rodnansky, who was a former chief economic advisor to President Zelensky until the end of 2024. He played an active role in wartime economic strategy, international negotiations, and Ukraine's recovering planning. He is now a professor at Cambridge University. What do you make of this situation at the moment? The 28-point peace deal that was proposed last week is already looks to be in tatters.
That's right. So what we're hearing is now there is apparently a 19-point plan that's been agreed between Ukraine and the US behind closed doors. Look, I mean, there's so many red lines that potentially could be crossed for Ukraine here. And there was never a guarantee at all that the Russians would play along, if at all. So this is where we are again. I think this is more about imitation at this point. It's more about style. It's more about attempting negotiations yet again, rather than really addressing the fundamental reasons behind the actual war. And none of them are resolved. So I'm still skeptical that we'll be able to reach anything meaningful here.
So you have no hope that this round of talks might actually lead to some form of peace?
I don't think so. My suspicion is that it's going to be very difficult because for a lasting peace, for something permanent, you would have to address the fundamental reasons of why this war occurred. And it has been building up over the years. It didn't just, flare up in 2022, actually. It's been building up ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, really. And for those 4 reasons to be addressed, takes a lot more effort, takes a lot more time, takes a lot more compromises.
Where does this end then? This war can't go on forever. Ukraine's army can't keep fighting forever.
Absolutely. So that's the key question. And unfortunately, the way it looks right now, this has the structure of a conflict, of a war, where either one of the side wins and the other loses. And we don't know yet which one's which, unfortunately, because it could drag out, it could last for a lot more years. Or it just takes a much more difficult compromise, which we haven't achieved yet.
And what compromise do you think Ukraine should make?
Look, I mean, for the Ukrainian people, there's a few red lines that cannot be crossed. As of right now, we do want security guarantees for this to be a successful peace deal, for this not to be seen as a failure in history afterwards if it just ends up being fragile and will lead to a renewed invasion some years down the line, for example. So that would be seen as a major blunder and failure historically. So we want to avoid that with security guarantees. We do not want to recognize a permanent cessation of our territories. That's another red line. And obviously, again, related to that, we cannot really accept a major decrease in the number of our armed forces. That would again be a red line.
Can President Trump be trusted as far as the Ukrainians are concerned to advocate for them?
Everyone wants peace. Of course, this is something that we all share. We don't want to continue fighting indefinitely and lose our people. So he's got his own incentive structure, but ultimately I think we are aligned.
And obviously President Zelensky is facing his own issues back home. How difficult is the timing for him and the Ukrainian government in terms of the corruption scandal that's continuing in Ukraine at the moment?
It is difficult. There is pressure building up domestically because of the corruption scandals, because of these revelations. And that creates pressure from within when it comes to the support of the president. He can only act if he has the support of the people. If he doesn't have the support, it's more difficult for him to act. Internationally, again, that creates additional pressure and additional risks for Ukraine, because our partners can say, look, well, you haven't been governed all too well, so you either agree to the terms that we put on the table, or you're on your own now. So again, this is additional pressure, and it's not easy for Ukraine.
Do you think this is President Zelensky's last chance to secure a deal, to kind of win over support back home that he's lacking at the moment?
That's hard for me to say. I really don't want to say whether it's the last chance or potentially there's going to be a new one. But it's certainly a very risky situation. And it's a challenge that we haven't confronted in this way before, because pressure is really mounting from all sides, domestically, internationally. Russia is still on the advance, increasingly so. It's not an easy situation, and definitely one that's going to be probably pivotal in the whole war effort.
Alexander Rodzansky, thank you very much.